seem to be much conversation going on at the moment. First one being Liverpool. What's your understanding going on there? Are there any sort of names that you're hearing in connection to Liverpool at this present moment?
Yeah, Liverpool are always quite quiet. It's how they work. We know that. And I think there's two key areas where we know they're going to strengthen as well. One is in the wide type area with a view to what Liverpool do very wisely, I think, which is find a player before they lose a player. And that means that you're almost constantly wondering what Liverpool need because they've got. And then if they can replace before they lose, that's just smart recruitment. And I think this is why they are always calm despite the noise. And the other thing I would say about Liverpool, just before we get into names, is if your recruitment is wise, then after a bit of business and a flurry, such as their midfield revamp 12 months ago, if it goes quiet, that doesn't mean you're not doing anything. It means you've succeeded. Because if every window, despite the excitement and the fact that it pays the whole bills, if every window you're signing, you're doing something wrong. Because if you're signing, especially with young players, is smart, then things should calm down after a while because it means that you've signed wisely. And that's what I always think Liverpool do so well. So the wide position is one to watch. And that's partially because they know that Salah may leave in a year's time and potentially Luis Diaz as well in the future. Although, as I've reported continually, from Liverpool's point of view, they value Diaz. And from Diaz's point of view, he still sees a way forwards at that football club. So there's no urgency or there's no imminent exit with Luis Diaz, despite constant speculation. Liverpool are planning for Salah, planning for Diaz at this stage, but that doesn't mean they're not recruiting in a wide area with a view to the future. And that's where Crescencio Somerville comes in, because despite the fantastic season he had at Leeds United, it would make sense for him to step back up to the Premier League and join a club where he might not start every single week, but can develop and ultimately have a now impact and, as importantly, a future impact at a price that's very Liverpool-like, because I'm told we're not looking at 40, 45, 50 million, 30, 35 million for Somerville, because Leeds are in a position where they have to sell. And unfortunately for Leeds, they are going to lose some star assets. I'm not as convinced, despite reports, that Archie Gray will go this summer. I think the player is more considered in his decision-making and is happy at Leeds United. But I think if the right offer comes in for Somerville, then that's an exit that I can see happening. I know we hear some links as well with Elise and Liverpool. Let's wait and see. It's twice the price. It's a big outlay. At the moment, I'm told Man City, Newcastle, Manchester United and Chelsea, and Somerville for Liverpool as one possibility. And then the other area is centre-back. And we have seen Liverpool look in the centre-back market for quite some time without necessarily finding the right kind of profile at the right kind of price. But I expect Liverpool to add a centre-back. And there's a few names we can rule out. First of all, Hincapié at Leverkusen, constantly linked with Liverpool. Not a name I expect to join. Tar now looks on his way to Bayern. Ignacio has been discussed internally, so might be one to watch. Pacho is another one that they really like. So young centre-back is the profile. And I think if the window ended and Liverpool didn't get a centre-back and a wide player, they would probably be disappointed. The other name with Liverpool that I'm always asked about, and we may as well kill two birds with one stone, is Levi Colwill, who Liverpool have had a long-standing appreciation for, but they're looking at the situation very distantly. They think nothing is possible this window. They've not moved. They've not even, to my knowledge, had a conversation on the agent side. It's simply a case of, if Colwill becomes available in the future, 2025 and onwards, Liverpool, PSG may enter that conversation. Now, I know we've heard reports about Bayern, and if they don't get Tar, Colwill again, but Chelsea are going to shut down any offers. They see Levi Colwill as integral. And there is a situation, potentially, where Reece James is suspended. If Ben Chilwell doesn't start the first game of the season and Conor Gallagher goes, who's the Chelsea captain for the first game of the season? It might be Levi Colwill, because he got given the armband for a couple of games last season. So Chelsea rate Colwill. And as long as Colwill, and this hasn't happened yet, as long as Colwill gets a guarantee from Enzo Maresca that when fit, he's the starting centre-back, not left-sided, like he had to play left-back in the beginning of the season, but centre-back. As long as he's the starting centre-back on the left side, then Colwill will be happy at Chelsea as well.
Yeah.
And then the only kind of interesting wrinkle is a year forwards. Because Colwell's gone bright and outstanding, under 21 euros, incredible. Gareth Southgate basically telling him, if you have another good season, you're in the mix to not only be at the Euros, but to compete with Harry Maguire for a starting spot. And then flash forwards a year through a mixture of in and out the side, injuries, playing on the left-hand side, Chelsea's form, whatever you put it down to, Colwell's not even in the England squad. So if another year was to pass, and then in 2025, he was to feel like he's not going to be in the mix for the 2026 World Cup, that's the summer when Colwill might start saying, I need to move somewhere to get what I'm looking for. But the Chelsea hope and belief is that they're aligned with Colwill, that he's going to be fit, centre-back, playing outstanding, one of the best centre-backs in England, and then he's got no reason to leave. Chelsea have got no reason to sell, and he'll very quickly, therefore, if that scenario happens, be back in the England squad.
Yeah, I think he'd be mad to leave right now. I do. Even though Liverpool, well-oiled machine, I think sometimes too many young players. I was so happy to see Benjamin Šeško stay. I think so many young players leave so young. The one that stands out the most, it still pains me to this day, is Renato Sanchez. I just felt, don't leave. Just stay where you are. Like, you're comfortable. You know people thrive in that area. And before we move on to Arsenal, I want to ask about Manchester City as well. Obviously, we know they've got a lot going on with the league and everything else. But in terms of transfers, the only name I've really seen them linked to is Bruno Guimaraes. Is that a deal you can see them triggering at some point in the coming weeks?
I think with Guimaraes, it's more Man City at the moment. Arsenal have got no intention to trigger the release clause, to my knowledge. But let's wait and see whether clubs can capitalise on Newcastle's financial situation. People are wrongly presuming it's just clause. It expires, remember, very soon. And then after that, the door is shut and he's staying at Newcastle. But that's not my understanding. My understanding is that the clause, of course, will be used as a take it or leave it at this point. But if the clause expires, and as the window progresses, Newcastle still need money, then they may have to consider offers for Bruno Guimaraes. There are other players that they can sell. But to my knowledge, they won't sell Botman and they won't sell Isak. Isak is the most untouchable player in the football club. It's also not true that Liverpool are interested in Anthony Gordon. They appreciate his profile. So when I say not interested, I don't mean they don't have respect for the player, but they're not coming in at the kind of price that would be required. And again, he's a not-for-sale player. So where do Newcastle find their money? Because they have managed to bring in one free transfer in Lloyd Kelly. That medical is pending, and a 5-year deal with a 1-year extension has been agreed. And then if they get James Trafford and there is optimism, that's going to be another package close to 20 million, but including add-ons. So then beyond that, how can Newcastle get 40, 50, 60 million or above to satisfy PSR concerns, but also add a wide player because they want Elise? That's 60 odd million. How can they do that without selling? Well, maybe 15, 20 million for Callum Wilson, 15, 20 million for Miguel Almiron. Maybe now they'll have to accept that Kieran Trippier goes, and Bayern have that long-standing interest, of course, and tried in January, perhaps a Sean Longstaff. But all of that adds up to maybe 70 million at most. Whereas you sell one player in Guimaraes, you bring in 80 to 100 million, depending on who offers what. And then not only are you fine financially, but you can also go out in the market and add one or two more. And let me be clear, because Newcastle fans somehow feel that everybody is against them. As long as there's a release clause, there's a possibility of an exit. But Guimaraes is happy at Newcastle, and Eddie Howe has said he wants to keep the player. But again, I come back to what I said before. If you only let one go and it's Guimaraes, and you get a big amount of money, in midfield, they've got Joe Linton, who can play there or in the front three. They've got Sandro Tonali coming back from his ban. They've got Sean Longstaff at the moment. They've got Elliot Anderson. They've got Lewis Miley. And they would probably have money to bring in another midfielder. So as big a blow as Bruno is, if it secures the club's financial footing and allows them to bring in 2 or 3 others, then there might be some logic to it. So my understanding is that Arsenal are not going to trigger the clause. But if a deal becomes available around 80 million, then at the right structure, they might consider it. But it's more Man City. And if City could get Bruno Guimaraes at 20 million below his clause later in the window, that's a deal that they might consider, especially now we know that Lucas Paqueta is not going to happen. So keep an eye on Man City rather than Arsenal. With Arsenal, the midfield situation is that they need to define Rice on paper, not in practice, because the versatility is an asset. But they need to say, okay, is Rice predominantly on paper a 6 or an 8? And then whatever player they get in midfield will complement Rice. The other thing, of course, is Thomas Partey going to stay or go? My understanding is he could just stay another year, but there is concrete Saudi interest again. They still have to persuade the player. And then they'll move in midfield. And Martin Zubimendi is still a realistic target. And the challenge there is not on fee. There's a release clause anyway. It's on persuading Zubimendi, who's kind of in love with Sociedad and wanted to stay in January, wanted to play in the Champions League knockouts, and is just really settled and doesn't want to move necessarily for the ambition of Premier League so much as might just like Sociedad and their project and that lifestyle and everything about that football club. So that's the difficulty in persuading him that he should have the ambition to move to a club like Arsenal. The other midfield target, long-standing, is Douglas Luiz. It's Juventus negotiating at the moment with Villa with 2 players, including Weston McKennie and a part cash, part player structure. So Arsenal are not in that conversation yet, but let's wait and see whether Luiz gets over the line. Juventus, the last time I checked, were optimistic. But if that falls through, there may be a later point where Arsenal could capitalise on Aston Villa's need to sell. So it is quite quiet on the midfield front at the moment, but this is also an indication of the fact that Arsenal were working on Sesko. So we know that finding a striker is a priority. They want a young left back that, like Yoel Hato, could be centre back that can play left back, or could be left back that could play centre back. Milos Kirkus is another name they've looked at. Arsenal and Chelsea are quite serious about him, even though Bournemouth don't want to sell. But the reality for Arsenal is that they have to work out big outgoings. They have to resolve the Ramsdale situation. They probably will get rid of either Eddie Nketiah or, at a less likely long shot, Gabriel Jesus. They'll be open to offers for both at the right price. And like I said before, they have to resolve the situation with Thomas Partey as well. And then they'll know who they can move for. And this is just the reality of when you have a big window like 12 months ago and you spend 250 plus million, Timber, Rice, Havertz, you can't just back that up again with another 100, 150, 200 million window without either outgoings or having to think very carefully with PSR about your financial situation. So when everyone sort of says Osimhen Arsenal, that's not a deal that they'll do. Because it's not just about the release clause and it's not just about the wages, it's also about the agent fees. So the only way that Arsenal, like with Guimaraes, would ever enter a conversation for a type of player like Osimhen is if it doesn't become about release clause or nothing. If there's a different deal to be had, that might be a different story. But at the moment, Arsenal are making sure that they sustain themselves financially, and that could lead to not necessarily a quieter window, but a window that focuses on outgoings first.
Which I always feel, look, I know that there's obviously a court case going on today. There's talk of Villa now suing the league because certain clubs, and I understand the logic, want to be able to just spend. But we spoke about this at large last week, and I think especially the younger generation of football fan, and certainly football, you said Newcastle fans feel like the world is against them at the minute, and I do understand it when you've got people circling for your players and you've got rich owners, but you can't spend much more. And as you've said, one of the reasons they can't spend isn't even because they've overspent, it's because they had clauses which saw everybody's wages go up when they made the Champions League. And then they essentially fouled last season, which means their wage bill's higher, and you've got to balance these things off. But I was saying to people last week, if you go back just 10, 15 years, the amount of clubs that were nearly going out of business, and some of which did, for 50 to 60 million pound debts, the idea that fans are just happy to let potentially hundreds of millions and billions of pounds of debt, because the contract to a player is a debt at the end of the day. The fact that just, it's fine to let a debt like that go. You're not all going to have owners like City and Roman Abramovich. So I honestly think people are being really naive to the fact of, I heard the Brighton one of the senior Brighton officials said this on Talk Sport about 5 months ago. He said,
Mhm.
"Isn't it mad that football is the only industry where the clubs are asking to lose more money? No other business in the world wants to lose money anyway, let alone lose more of it. It's crazy."